Namaste and welcome everyone. If I have my count correct, this is session number 9 in our ongoing series Kala Evam Adhyatm. Four of the first 4 videos have been uploaded at Auro University's YouTube channel. Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center's YouTube channel. And I think Satya has already shared those links. Others will be uploaded soon. And we'll also be sharing them on Sri Aurobindo Society's YouTube channel in the weeks to come. But it's really been, wonderfully eclectic series that we've been discussing various things to bring out the theme of art and spirituality in the light of Sri Aurobindo. So last week we had Miss Bindu Popley sharing with us on painting, contemporary painting. She's an artist herself. So her process, her inner journeys that have led to her painting work. And before that, we had a session with Dr. Pranjal Garg, who talked about Indian sculpture. So today, I will be continuing that conversation, that discussion, with the focus on Indian temple architecture. So Sri Aurobindo had written a very insightful essay on the inner dimension of Indian temple architecture. So I will be sharing a bit about that. And I take this opportunity to welcome Sri Shiv Shankar Babu also from Tamil Heritage Trust, who will also be conducting a very specialized session in 2 weeks, not the next Wednesday, the Wednesday after that, with regard to what the Agama traditions have said about temple architecture. So today he's kind of joining us with this intent to know a little bit about what Sri Aurobindo has said on this. So with that, let me begin with, and I should also add that because of some program that is going to happen soon at Auro University, just give me a minute, please, just give me a minute. Okay, so yeah, so what I was saying was that in this session, I'll be talking a little bit about, the inner dimension of temple architecture that Sri Aurobindo has spoken about. And I was also saying that because of some programs that are happening or will be happening soon at Auro University, Dr. Kiran will not be able to, Dr. Kiran Singh will not be able to join us, or she may join a little later if her responsibilities are free from there. But let's just, on behalf of CELC, Auro University, and Renaissance at Sri Aurobindo Society, Renaissance Journal, we are happy to continue with this series. So without any further ado, let me begin with my presentation. So what I have done is I've collected various images and selected quotes from Sri Aurobindo to give an insight into what he has spoken about, what he has written about, what a temple represents spiritually or in a psycho-spiritual way. So the outer architectural details that Shiv Shankar Babuji will be taking up in 2 weeks from today. But here, Sri Aurobindo is concerned more about the inner dimension. So before, most of the images, except 1 or 2, are from our own, my and my husband's own collection based on our travels over the last few years to various temples in and around Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and a few other places. And I'll be kind of referring quickly to some of the places, but hopefully there will be some time toward the end to ask specific questions about these specific temples as well. So I thought, let me just begin with a quick like a overview through a quick short video clip of few of these temples to give you a sense of variety of the temple architecture that we are talking about. These are standalone temples. In India, we have a tradition of cave temples as well, but at this particular small clip is all the standalone free construction of temples. So this one, the first one on the cover is Gangaikonda Cholapuram here in Tamil Nadu. So let me quickly begin with this. Famous Vittala temple in Hampi. This is one of the Hoysala temples in Karnataka. Chennakeshwar temple. This is also Chennakeshwar temple in Beloo. This is Panchakudi Prasadi, the Jain temple. This is in Karnataka. It's the Mahakuta temple. From Karnataka, the background. This is the depiction of Samudra Manthan, Amrit Manthan. This is the huge Chandragiri in Karnataka, Jain temple. So the very first thing that Sri Aurobindo refers to is, in Indian tradition, we say temple is an abode of the deity first and foremost. It's place of worship, but that comes afterwards. First and foremost, it's a place or home or abode of the deity. So Sri Aurobindo speaks about temple is in its inmost reality. In its inmost dimension is an altar raised to the divine self. So it's not the deity outside of us, but the divine self within. It's an altar raised to the divine self, a house of the cosmic spirit, an appeal and aspiration to the infinite. It's this part that we should be really focusing on, how temple symbolizes the aspiration that is there in nature and in man and in human soul, aspiration to the infinite. So the images that you see, again, the first one is from Gangaikonda Cholapuram. This is the Dwarkadhish temple in Dwarka, and this is a cave temple, which is actually more than a piece of architecture. It's a sculpture because it's carved out of one rock from inside out. So let me just continue with this, and then I'll take a little break and we can have a little discussion on that. One of the other things, just to begin our session on this temple architecture, is the idea that when did temple construction begin in Indian religious spiritual history? Because in the Vedic times, there was no trend or no tendency to build altars, to construct temples as abode of deities. Rather, the focus was on this yagna, the outer karma, the outer sacrifice, the outer fire sacrifice, the fire ritual that was there. But the same idea of creating an elaborate yagna vedi, an altar at which the fire sacrifice was done, the same idea evolved as the Indian spiritual culture evolved into from Vedic Upanishadic age to the later Vedic age to especially the Purano-tantric age, when the Vedic deities also evolved into the trinity that we commonly understand as, the Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, and also the pantheon of the energies of the divine, the Shakti of the divine. So that's the tantric aspect, the tantric phase in Indian religious spiritual history. As the Indian culture, the Indian spiritual culture, the outer form evolved into this phase. And Sri Aurobindo has spoken about 3 phases of Indian religious spiritual history, from the Vedic Upanishadic to the Purano-tantric to the third one, which is where we are at present, where the idea will be more towards bringing all spirituality to all life. So the Vedic Upanishadic was at the intuitive and the higher mind revelatory stages of the, if you look at the consciousness, in the Purano-tantric stage, the spirituality became more a matter of addressing the vital and the higher vital needs of human being. Hence the elaborate rituals, the elaborate temple worship, the beautiful construction of temple worships. But the inner idea remained the same. Now, Sri Aurobindo says the next phase is when all of the outer life has to be absorbed in the spiritual quest, which was the same quest that led the Vedic rishis through the outer yagna to the inner yagna. But that's a whole other discussion about what is the inner dimension of yagna and things like that. But the point is that whatever was the house of fire, the yagna vedi in the Vedic times, that was replaced by the temple. So many of the tantric, agamic puja rituals are in a way a new form given to the old eternal yagna, the eternal sacrifice that was happening in the Vedic times. So the karmic ritual of sacrifice was transformed into the devotional temple ritual. Sri Aurobindo says this. This particular temple on the right is from Kanchipuram. It's the Kailashnath temple, a very, very beautiful, small, but very beautiful temple. Again, just very quickly before we go a little deeper into it, typically we understand that there are 2 traditions, 2 architectural traditions that came up in India. One is the Nagara style, which is often spoken of as the North Indian style of temple architecture. And one is the Dravidian or the South Indian temple architecture. But there is also a third, a more hybrid temple architectural tradition that grew up in India, which is the Vesara, which had synthesized some of the aspects of the Nagara temple architecture and the Dravidian architecture. So the idea remained the same, that a temple has to symbolize that aspiration of man rising to the cosmic, rising to the infinite. And if you can see the idea, a temple representing also a way, especially the highest, the shikhar or the vimana in the Dravidian temple, the height that represented connecting earth to the heaven. So the Garbhagriha was installed, as you can see in the the lower two images. The Garbhagriha, where the deity was to be installed, had to be at that particular axis, which represented a way of connecting earth to heaven, connecting matter to spirit. So this was very, very consciously designed like that. Another important thing, before I just stop this presentation to take a little pause, is that when we go to a temple, our concern is how do we understand a temple? And again, my focus in this session will be on looking at the inner dimension, not so much the architectural details, the sculptural details, which can mesmerize us, but what do they symbolize? So again, just as a reminder, something that we had discussed earlier also, that any great Oriental work of art, which includes these, if you look at temple as a great work of art, great work of architecture, yes, there is a lot of engineering, a lot of science involved in precise measurement, just as there was a lot of science involved in construction of a Vedic altar, a Vedic Yagna Vedi, because there was a lot of geometry, precise calculations, astronomical calculations were done. Same in the temple construction also, all that science and engineering is involved. We can just take a look at amazing pillars that were there much before the modern machinery was invented. But what Sri Aurobindo reminds is that if we were to take a look at these temples as a great work of art, which they were, they again should not be seen with a mere aesthetic curiosity or in a touristic sort of way, but rather to be experienced, rather to be seen, what Sri Aurobindo says, to seen in loneliness, in the solitude of oneself, in moments when one is capable of long and deep meditation, and as little weighted as possible with the conventions of material life. So this is not only to outwardly appreciate the temple, the beauty of the temple, that we should be as little weighted as possible with our concerns of material life. But in a way, this is what also a temple represented in the Indian consciousness. The temple is because it is an abode of the deity, it is also an abode that can be a refuge to the tormented soul, or a refuge to an aspiring soul, or a place where one can go in to seek that quietude, seek that comfort away from the concerns of our mundane material life. So, which was also the consideration behind these elaborate mandapas that were created. If we go back to the previous slide, all these mandapas that were created, the halls that were created before you get to the Garbhagriha, Ardha Mandapa, Mukha Mandapa, all these things, that these were places for sitting either by yourself quietly, or there could be another way of aspiration or expression of an aspiration to do some kind of collective meditation. So this could also be a place for people to come together in silence, or in singing of devotional hymns, devotional songs. So there were specifically Nritya Mandapa, especially if you go to the Somnath temple, a very elaborate Nritya Mandapa. So temples also became a way to bring not only the spiritual, to be a space for an expression of the highest spiritual aspiration, but also everything else that goes on in life. Because we have to remember this one truth about Indian spirituality, that Indian spirituality always was life affirming. It was not about life escaping or world negating or life negating. All aspects of life were given a spiritual tone or a spiritual color, a spiritual hue. So arts, music, dance, performance, all these became part of the temple culture. So temple became a place for communities, people around the temple to gather, to indulge, express various creative pursuits as well. So inwardly and outwardly, that idea has to be understood. Another very important dimension of Indian temple, both these images, first of all, are from the famous Lepakshi temple, Veerbhadra temple in Lepakshi in Andhra Pradesh, the famous Nagalingam, and the story about how this came to be is also very interesting. This other thing, the other picture is the actual mandap, the Nritya mandap, where which was, the story goes that this was designed where the marriage ceremony of Shiva and Parvati would take place. So elaborate carvings, elaborate sculpture. But what Mother reminds us is, which is very true of the way Indian temples were built, to bring out the idea of one integral beauty, one single movement of the adoration of the divine. The divine is adored not only through the temple elaborate puja that will happen in the Garbhagriha, but through painting, through sculpture, through architecture, through various other aspects that will happen in the construction of a temple. So true art everywhere, Mother said, has been this expression of an integral unity, painting, sculpture, architecture. What has happened over time is that, painting has become its own specialized art. Architecture has become its own specialized art or science, and sculpture has become its own specialized art. And, often these things, especially painting and sculpture, they become objects in museums. But that was not the way our ancients conceived the experience that we should have of art. Rather, we should experience art in a sense of unity, in a sense of totality. So you go to temple, you also get this aesthetic exposure, this aesthetic experience, this rasa of being surrounded by beautiful sculpture, beautiful paintings. So this idea of unity, this idea of totality is very important when we look at the temple architecture in India. So now, before maybe let me take a pause here before I start. With this as the setup, as the setting of the context, that is that unity, the inner dimension, the inner aspiration, we need to look at how, what Sri Aurobindo speaks about in terms of how do we understand what a temple represents. But before I do that, let me take a pause and see if there's any comment, any question, any thought anybody would like to share. So should I continue in that case then? Because I know in the interest of time, I'm going a little fast with some of the slides, but if there's any interest to know any bit more detail about any of the pictures, any of the temples, please feel free to raise your hand or stop. Sometimes when I'm in the share screen mode, I can't see, but maybe somebody can just intervene and let me know. So I'm going to go ahead with the rest of the presentation. So how to view a temple? Okay. So again, from, in India, we've had this whole compendium or whole body of literature, whole body of shastras that have elaborated a lot on how to find the right place where temple is to be constructed, what are the spiritual, religious, occult, psychological, geographical considerations in choosing a particular location, what kind of temple, what kind of material to be used, and all these details, which is what Shiv Shankar Babuji will be dealing with in terms of the agamas, the shastras that speak about temple construction in particular. But Sri Aurobindo, as I said, tells us a little, gives us a little different way to understand. These temples are there. How do we go and appreciate what these temple represents? So we also have to recall here, Sri Aurobindo was writing in response to this criticism that Indian temple architecture is chaotic, is confused, has a lot of unnecessary details. There is hardly any space left, hardly any negative space to appreciate any specific work of beauty. There is crowded efflorescence, so many things that this critic was talking about. So in response to that, Sri Aurobindo made it very clear as to the inner dimension of what this temple architecture represents is. So he tells us in a very precise way, how should we understand or how should we view a temple? So the very first thing, and it's important to read him directly, the straight way here is not to detach the temple from its surroundings, but to see it in unity with the sky and low-lying landscape, or with the sky and hills around, and feel the thing common to both, the construction and its environment. Let's take a pause here. To see the temple in unity with the sky and the landscape around. So I have three images here. The biggest one, many of you could also probably recognize already. It is Somnath Temple in Gujarat, in Saurashtra. And the location, the landscape around, the sea, the fact that there is nothing imparting the view from the top of the temple, all these things were highly considered before choosing this particular space for this particular temple, which is why it was so important for K.M. Munshi ji and Sardar Patel to ensure that this temple was rebuilt at the same location. So there is a very important cultural significance of this temple, but that's a whole other history to be discussed at some other point if somebody is interested. But this temple is significant because only when we also see it in the unity with the sky and the landscape and the sea around. The other image, the one at the very top, is the Chandragiri temple, which is a Jain temple in Karnataka in Shravanabelagola. This is the place where there are some kind of like, monastic style of caves also. And in one of the caves, Chandragupta Maurya, the emperor whom Chanakya had installed after removing Dhananand, in the last 12 years of his life, he became a Jain, and he lived for last 12 years of his life serving his guru in this particular spot where this whole temple has come about. And the third image is, you're only seeing the Vimana, the topmost part of this particular temple, which is the Virupaksh temple in Hampi. But again, the landscape is important. This is what was the old Kishkindha of Ramayana. So the whole setup of boulders, rocks in that whole area adds to our appreciation of that temple. So Sri Aurobindo reminds us, when you go and look at a temple, don't see it as a stand-alone abode of deity, but see it to experience the art of what temple represent, see it with the landscape around, because then you begin to feel two things: the reality in nature and the reality expressed in the work of art. What is that reality? We'll see in a bit, but this is what is the first thing: not to detach the temple from its surroundings, but to see it in unity. Thus seen, this work of man seems to be something which has started out and detached itself against the power of the natural world. Now, which has started out from nature, a temple is a construction in matter. Matter represents the most inconscient, the most rigid substance in which life has evolved. And then in life, mind has evolved. So against the power of the inconscient matter, something has come about, has started and detached itself against the power of the natural world, something of what? That one common aspiration in both meaning nature in the previous sentence, the reality in nature in which life is evolving, and the reality of man's aspiration. One common aspiration in both nature and man to the same infinite spirit of itself. There is a famous line of Sri Aurobindo, which everybody quotes: all life is yoga, but that's half the sentence. The full sentence is: all life subconsciously or consciously is a yoga of nature. So the whole existence is evolving in the sense that out of the whole manifestation that we see, the whole creation, existence that we see started from inconscient. And the way in our tradition, story of creation is explained, Mother has explained it in a much simpler way as to how the first stirrings, if you go to the hymn of creation in Rig Veda and Mother's story of creation, you find very interesting parallels. But the first stirrings of awakening that happened in the deep inconscient, that's where manifestation or existence began. The first stirrings. And from that, things began to move up. Things begin to move up. Same way, there is a ground, there is a hard surface, but against the resistance of that matter, the hard surface of the matter, because of the aspiration to create something, a temple is born, a temple gets built. So temple represents that aspiration both in nature to rise and to meet with its source, which is that infinite spirit, that cosmic spirit, that divine self. The inconscient uplook, and against it, the strong single relief of the self-conscient effort and success of finding. So against the inconscient, there is a look up, uplook, and the idea of self-conscient effort. So when effort, the subconscious yoga in nature becomes conscious yoga in man, that's when things begin to move up. So once when from matter, in matter, life evolved. In life, mind evolved. And the highest creature that we have today in the evolutionary cycle is man, the mental being. The word man comes from Manu, which means the one, the mental being itself. And in that, the evolution becomes conscious. The effort to rise beyond the limits of the mind becomes conscious. Before man, there was some rudimentary mind in some of the higher animal life, but that could not become self-conscious effort. Only by coming of man, only with the coming of human individual, the human creature, that subconscious yoga in nature becomes conscious effort. So temple represents all of that in this view when we begin to understand. Now, then we come to a little bit more elaborate things. This is the famous Rameshwaram temple. Again, what are some of the things that are unique to this? Is particularly of the Dravidian architecture, but you find the same tendency, the same style in the Nagara architecture also, especially if you look at some of the Khajuraho temples, the same forms being repeated, the same, lessening of the form from the base to the top. So what are some of the key characteristics that we see in these structures? 3 points I have pulled out from Sri Aurobindo's writing: subtle yet pronounced lessening from the base towards the top. So the base is wide and towards the top, it's subtle but pronounced lessening. So it has become lesser and lesser, a more specific, an upward movement is like that. At each stage, a repetition of the same form. It's very clear from this image. And the third thing, crowded fullness and indented relief. Indented relief, the relief panels, bas relief panels. So this is pretty common in all Dravidian architecture vimanas that we see. And as I said, also in the Nagara style. What do these things represent? Let's look at Sri Aurobindo again. So what he says, to find the significance, we have first to feel the oneness of the infinity in which this nature and this art live. So why the crowdedness? Why so much depiction of various moods, emotions, leelas of the divine, or various aspects of ordinary human life depicted in the lower portions of the temple, the various purusharthas that we speak of in Indian culture, the pursuit of artha, the pursuit of kama, the pursuit of dharma, all of these activities surrounding these purusharthas are also reflected. There is also a lot of sculpture representing various life forms, various activities of human life. So all of that, first, to understand that, we have to feel the oneness of the infinity. It is reaching to the infinite with a sense of oneness. Then only we can understand this thronged expression as the sign of infinite multiplicity, which fills this oneness. This oneness of Brahman, again, the idea of the Vedic Upanishadic Brahman, especially the Upanishadic phase, one Brahman and many forms, multiplicity in the manifestation. This oneness is not a bland oneness where everything, all diversity is dissolved, but each multiplicity, each diversity remains and keeps its own uniqueness, which is what the phrase infinite multiplicity represents. There is multiplicity of the infinite variety, but all of that is subsumed under the oneness. Infinite multiplicity, which fills this oneness. We have to see it, we have to feel it. It's not an intellectual seeing alone. It's not a mental understanding alone, but it is an inner work, an inner practice. How do we experience the infinite? How do we experience the oneness? That is where the sadhana comes in. So how to view an Indian temple? Not merely as an aesthetic curiosity or intellectual curiosity, but as a practice of sadhana. Only when we can see that oneness and feel that oneness, and at the same time feel the infinite multiplicity within, we can truly appreciate what a temple represents. Before that, it is more or less an aesthetic understanding of it. Then he continues, see in the regular lessening ascent of the edifice, the subtler and subtler return from the base on earth to the original unity. So in our life also, the life is a very wide field, wide kshetra. But when we begin to turn inward and upward, many of the trappings of our outward life, our outer life, become less and less interesting to us. So as we return from the base on earth, that is the material life, to the original source, as we seek higher, as we turn upward, give that upward look and an inward look, naturally there is a lessening. There is that the trappings are lesser and lesser, and we are freer and freer in our approach to seek that unity. So this idea of this shape of pyramid, broad at the base and tapering or lessening towards the top, also represents the kind of experience we go through in our life. So subtler and subtler return from the base on earth to the original unity, and then only we can seize on the symbolic indication of its close at the top, the kalasha that are kept. The question as to why so much efflorescence, so much crowded, the third point that was there in the crowded fullness. Why? Sri Aurobindo's answer is very simple. Why not? Because of this infinite multiplicity. If manifestation is of the nature of infinite multiplicity, why would a sculptor or an architect or a temple builder not express that infinite multiplicity in the temple? So Sri Aurobindo's answer is very simple. In her ancient architecture, sculpture, and art, there is no reticence, no holding back of riches, no blank spaces. This is what often the critics speak about. And Sri Aurobindo says this seems only when you stay at the outer surface. But she, that is India, inwardly what India is trying to express is, or Indian mind is trying to express, which is working with the idea which Sri Aurobindo speaks of, spirituality as is the master key of Indian mind. India, she labors to fill every rift with ore. Wherever there is a gap, fill it with some precious stuff, precious mineral, precious metal. Occupy every inch with plenty. Why? Because that is the necessity of her superabundance of life, of the teeming of the infinite within her. This is an absolutely wrong understanding or a wrong view many of us have been given about India, that in India we've only had a world negating, life negating, navel gazing spirituality. If that were the case, we would not be seeing this kind of crowded superabundance of life represented in our ancient buildings. So because India was never a life negating spiritual culture, India was a highly vital, life affirming spiritual culture or civilization. So that superabundance life comes out in its artistic expressions. So no corner is left untouched with some kind of beauty added there. She, that is India, India lavishes her riches because she must. As the infinite fills every inch of space with the stirring of life and energy, because it is the infinite. It is not the void of the illusionists. It is the infinite of the Upanishadic seers that have been the basis of all Indian creative pursuits, especially whether it is in literature, whether we speak of Ramayana, Mahabharata, any of the other kavyas, even works of Kalidas, full of superabundance of life, full of that infinite emotions, the infinite multiplicity, because infinite fills every inch of space, and that infinite was being reflected through our temple's sculptural wealth also. When we keep these things in mind, what we see is not an absence of unity, but rather a tremendous unity. So the two examples that you see here, one is again from Rameshwaram, the famous hall, the infinite leading to that one point, the hallways. When you walk through the hallways of this temple in Rameshwaram, you can actually experience that, of walking from the infinite multiplicity to the one, the seeking of that one. And the other one is from Aihole in Karnataka, not far from Badami, the Western Chalukyas. So we're talking 8th and 9th century, maybe 7th or 8th century. And I picked this particular picture because you might find similarity with the architecture of this particular temple with the Indian Parliament building, the old, current Parliament building. This place is very interesting. The whole complex of Badami, Aihole, and Pattadakal, the triangle, especially Aihole and Pattadakal, because these were spaces used to experiment with temple architecture. So we are talking somewhere between 6th and 9th century. These Chalukya kings were big fans of, they patronized a lot of architects and engineers and gave this land for a lot of experimentation to happen in temple architecture, which is where why you also see the the Nagara style temples built in the same complex, and the Dravidian style temples built in the same complex, and the Vesara, the hybrid style. But all of that were done with the sense of unity. So let's just finish with this continuation of this understanding. This is the famous Vithala temple of Hampi. This, again, you see this Ratha. This is another form that was experimented upon and used in many of the temples in southern India in particular, but also in northern India. Going back to the Vedas, what does a Ratha represent, chariot represent in Veda? From Sri Aurobindo's point of view, from Sri Aurobindo's psycho-spiritual interpretation of Veda, a chariot or a Rath represents the movement of the energy. So when you build a temple, the famous Darasuram temple, for example, in Tamil Nadu, Eravateshwara temple, which has the musical steps, or this Vithala temple where we see this standalone Rath, it represents the movement of energy. With that insight, you can go deeper into why we have this famous iconography of Krishna and Arjun sitting on the Rath, and the entire Bhagavad Gita teaching given while seated on a Rath. So if we start looking in this inner way, so many things, so many insights come. But let's get back to the temple architecture here. Reinterpret intimately what this representation means in terms of our own spiritual self-existence and cosmic being. And we have what these great builders saw in themselves and reared in stone. So the builders, the architects, they experienced that aspiration within, and they tried to express it in stone. To appreciate the detail of Indian architecture is easy when the whole is thus seen and known. Otherwise, it is impossible. Sri Aurobindo says this very categorically. So unity of idea and design is the first requisite in architecture, as in any other art. So let me just show you one example of this. I mean, in my own experience, I have not seen any more crowded infinite multiplicity expressed in a temple than here. This is the Sun Temple in Modhera, Gujarat. Each and every pillar is so intricately carved, and each is kind of like that divine detail. This is a close-up of one pillar. But you can be lost in all the details. You can find unity by going into each and every detail, experience the oneness while going deep into each and every little detail, each and every little story represented on any of these pillars. But when you step out and see the temple in its whole, you get a whole other dimension. So there is a temple, there is the kund, there is the landscape around. So that unity, I mean, this conception of what the whole thing would look like must have been, it's amazing when you appreciate it like that. But part of that unity was also to express the unity in art. So temples also became a place for sculptors to show the best. This is probably the first magnificent representation of Nataraj. This is in Badami Cave #1. Again, we are talking 6th or 7th century. The art of sculpture flourished in all those cultures where they were, these sculptures were not built as standalone pieces, but rather against the natural background, against the great architecture of the temple. This just before you enter the Badami cave. And there is the little Ganesha trying to maybe imitate his father, trying to dance. And there is Nandi, so many details. Just a quick mention of what happens in the temple ritual, the murti, the puja, that, the whole thing happens, the inner significance of that, not the outer act, the outer karma, the outer ritual. But when we are talking about appreciating temple architecture, we must also spend some time talking about the inner dimension of what happens in a living temple, which is the offering of puja, the offering of worship, the offering of adoration, devotion to the deity, to the divine, to a certain form of the divine, to a certain image of the divine. What does the image represent? The image, to the Hindu, Sri Aurobindo says, is a physical symbol and support of the supra-physical, something that is beyond physical. It is a basis for the meeting between the embodied mind, that is the human being, and sense of man, the outer senses of man. Hence the emphasis on beauty in all pujas, in all rituals. The meeting point between the embodied mind and sense and the supra-physical power, force or presence which he worships and with which he wishes to communicate. So an image, whether it is the image of the form of Nandi, the form of Nataraj as we saw, or the form of Shivaling, or any other deity, the beautiful form of any of the goddesses, the beautiful form of Rama or Krishna or any deity. It is a symbol and support of the physical, supra-physical. It is that meeting point between the mind and sense, because Indian culture understood that not everybody is ready to rise to the supra-physical, rise to the one supreme source, the one supreme force and power or presence without the form, without the help of a form. So form was a help that is required, and form becomes a medium through which the human soul communicates to that formless presence. This is a very interesting temple. This is again in Karnataka, not far from Nandi Hills. This temple is called Bhogi Nandishwara Temple. So there is a temple in Nandi Hills also, which is the Yogi, I forget its name, but it has a yogi in front of it. But this is the Bhogi Nandeshwara temple. And a lot of newly married people go and worship there. And there, Shiva and Parvati in their grahast stage of life, in their grahast form as householders, are invoked. Again, another idea from Sri Aurobindo, the inner meaning of image worship, the Murti Puja, or the worship of form, which is the main thing that happens in a temple. Indian image worship is not the idolatry of a barbaric or undeveloped mind. For even the most ignorant know that the image is a symbol and support and can throw it away when its use is over. Elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo uses the word scaffolding. All the outer karma, the outer ritual is a scaffolding that we use until the inner temple within, the temple within is built. So once the use is over, the outer form, outer ritual is not required. The worshipper of many gods still knows that all his divinities are forms, names, personalities, and powers of the one. His gods proceed from one Purusha. His goddesses are energies of the one divine force. Again, the same idea of oneness and multiplicity. Shiv Shankar ji, can you please mute yourself just for a minute? I'm just about. So these are the indented reliefs. Shiv Shankar ji, can you please mute yourself? Yeah. Okay. So again, this is the crowded multiplicity. This is one corner from one of the Hoysala temples. I think this is the Hoysaleshwara temple in Halibid. So to bring this all to a close, Indian sacred architecture constantly represents, says Sri Aurobindo, the greatest oneness of the self. We've been talking about it, the cosmic, the infinite in the immensity of its world design, the multitude of its features of self-expression, the Lakshan. Yet the oneness is greater than and independent of their totality and in itself indefinable. And everything else that comes with the starting point of unity in conception, the mass of design, the immensity of material, the crowding abundance of significant ornamentation and detail, and its return towards oneness are only intelligible, that is only understandable as necessary circumstances of this poem. This poem of the infinite, this epic, this poem can be an epic as in grand temples like Sri Rangam or the Meenakshi temple in Madurai, or the grand, even the grand Kailash temple in Ellora, which is a cave temple, a cave architecture. They are of epic proportions, but there are also many smaller structures, the lyrics, but the truth that these are songs to the infinite, these are aspiration to the infinite remains the same. So only when we look at temple in this way, we can understand the inner significance of the Indian temple architecture. Just to close with a few images, this is the Veerbhadra temple in Lepakshi. I mean, amazing. When you look at the vastness of it, you can feel that teeming multiplicity. This is a view of the Pattadakal temple complex, where you see the experimentation that was happened. This is a Nagara style, this is a Dravidian style, and there are some Vesara style temples, just to give you a little panoramic view of that. When we look at the past of India, to bring this to a close, what strikes us is her stupendous vitality. So no navel-gazing culture could have given us these monuments. These are not monuments to be seen only as dead monuments, but as expression of the stupendous life force that was there in building up of this civilization. Her inexhaustible power of life and joy of life, her almost unimaginably prolific creativeness. Both of these are Hampi, which is a UNESCO heritage site. Okay, so temples help us go within. Let us give ourselves 2 minutes to go within as we appreciate some of the cave temples of India. The images that you will see next are Ajanta, Ellora, and Badami caves. So this is just a quick overview of the temple architecture or appreciation of temple architecture with help from Sri Aurobindo's vision of what the inner truth of India was, how it was being expressed through her ancient sacred architecture. So I know we are a little bit over time, but if there's any quick comment or thought somebody would like to share, or any quick question. Oh, there are some comments in the chat. Okay, so hope you explain more about the significance of Garbhagriha. Yes, so I think maybe Shiv Shankar Babu, that's also a question we'll take up next in 2 weeks. So yes, the Garbhagriha, the inner womb, the womb in which we have to go in after going through all the multiplicity of the life, in solitude, experience the simplicity, the non-adored, unadored simplicity of the Garbhagriha, which represents the direct, the communion that we are trying to get into with the deity, the oneness that we are trying to experience with the deity. So it's, I mean, the exact word Garbhagriha, the womb, we have to go into the womb, back to the womb. That is the source of the unity, the source from which everything began. So, which is why Garbhagriha in most of these big elaborate temples are very tiny. The hall, the mandaps, the paths that you go into with all the adornment, the crowded multiplicity around, you keep going, keep walking, keep walking, keep walking, and you get to the unadored, simple Garbhagriha. Very many places, very tight spaces. So you can, be just in solitude with the deity. And again, there is a deeper significance of darshan also. What does darshan mean? Is it I am seeing the deity, or is it that the deity should also see me, or is it both? So all those things, the inner significance of all those, what we do in a temple also become very interesting. So yes, maybe Shiv Shankarji, I'll request him to go speak a little bit more when he takes up the Agama tradition of temple architecture. Okay, there is a comment from Narendra ji also. Wonderful coverage on, yes, thank you. Nice selection of relevant pictures to suit Sri Aurobindo's. Thank you, Shiv Shankar ji.
Yeah, it is a very good, enlightening speech. I was going through Sri Aurobindo's views on uh, temple architecture and how the Westerners see it, and how the Indians or the Indian point of view is there. And if you see the background, all the earlier descriptions and the books, reference materials are explained to the Indian public or the world with a lexicon of Pantheon, the Greek, Italian, and Roman architecture, which puts form over priority to the spiritual, whereas the Indian way of looking is to look everything spiritual or with the form, which signifies a symbolism. So this aspect is one of the key areas which was highlighted in his talk in the beginning, which I'll be expanding in little more detail about the forms, numbers, how Agamas explain it beautifully, the multiplicity starting from the oneness. I'm taking the reverse one. How you take one and expand into multiplicity. This is what temple architecture calculations are about. So that aspect, we will try to see it in the reverse in the next session. And
Yes.
kudos to a very lively session. What was a brief 10-page presentation by Sri Aurobindo on his views. You have beautifully visualized that into the relevant and very, very apt pictures of Indian temples and how they convey the concept in a beautiful way. So it has been a very good, enlightening lecture for me also. Hope I continue at the same expectation and the foundation built by you. And very eager to meet the crowd next week, probably the week after next week on
Yes.
6th. Thank you very much for the support. I'm very much interested in interacting with the team.
Thank you.
And
Thank
also
you.
learn new ideas. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We look forward to your presentation, Sri Shiv Shankarji. So that will be in 2 weeks. Next week, hopefully we'll have somebody joining us from England, Krishna Priya, who is both a performing artist and an art producer, as well as a visual artist. So she's going to talk about her art from how she, like Miss Bindu's session last time, how she looks at her art from a spiritual perspective. Maybe she'll focus more on performing art, as she's also a dancer and a producer of performance arts in England. So I'm in correspondence with her. We inform in the WhatsApp group more about her. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining and for your continued support to this series. The idea is to, because we are recording it, so the idea is that this will be available for people to absorb outside of our Zoom meetings as well. And maybe at the end of this series, we'll put together some sort of a video, some sort of a book, some other material as a way to document all the work that has happened. So with that, I think we should close. Thank you so much for joining, and we will meet next week. Thank you.